So this guy phoned me. He said, I know you booked up. He said, but we have a special opportunity in Birmingham. He said, we have got for the first time ever the City Hall to preach a gospel crusade. And I have a visiting evangelist. And we want Rufaro to come and convene the meeting, run everything, do everything. And the preacher will preach. I said, oh, well, who's the preacher? He said, it's a German guy called Reinhard Bonnke. We went and we worked alongside Reinhard Bonnke for 5 days. The last night, I said to Reinhard, can I come and talk to you about something? Yeah, sure. And I told him I felt God is prompting me to be a part of his ministry. He said, there's no place for you, nothing. Very uncomfortable silence, And as I stood up to go, he said, there's one thing, but it's nothing for you. I said, what is that? He said, our transport department is a disaster, and I need somebody to come and change it. I said, Reinhard, that's my background. That's my world. And he said, would you come and do that? I said, yes.
Well, everybody, welcome back to another broadcast of the Daniel Kolenda Show. I have a very special guest today, and somebody that, out of all the episodes, Peter, that we've recorded here, I don't know that I've looked forward to one as much as today.
Wow.
Peter is truly not only a living legend, especially in CFAN world, Christ for All Nations. He is a key man and has been the key man in this ministry for a long, long time, but also a dear friend.
Yes.
And so I want to do something a little bit different today, Peter. I want to actually read something to you.
Oh, wow.
So I took a moment this morning and I just wrote down some thoughts, and I have a letter that I want to read you.
Oh, wow.
Partly because I find it harder to say sappy, sentimental things impromptu. So I'm just going to read this. And this is written to you from me. It says, Dear Peter, a lot of people know the name Reinhard Bonnke. Millions around the world were impacted by his ministry. But whenever the story of Christ for All Nations is told truthfully, no credible version of it can ever be written without Peter and Evangelist Vandenberg standing at the very center. You came alongside Reinhard when you were both still young men. You had gifts, talents, leadership ability, your own dreams and ambitions, but you laid all of that down to serve another man's calling, and you did it without wavering for a lifetime. You carried burdens most people never saw. When there was crises, you stepped into them. When there were messes, you cleaned them up. When there was danger, you walked toward it, not away from it. Most people only saw crowds, platforms, miracles, and headlines, but you were there for the riots, the threats, the malaria, the sleepless nights, the impossible decisions, the pressure, the weight, and the sacrifice.
Wow.
And you never flinched. A lesser man might have asked, why am I risking my life for someone else's vision? But that was not your spirit. You served faithfully, loyally, and humbly year after year, decade after decade. And I truly do not believe that Reinhard and Annie Bonnke could have fulfilled the call of God on their lives the way that they did without you and Vanjie standing beside them. But Peter, what I want to say to you today is not only about what you meant to Reinhard and CFAN, it's also about what you have meant to me personally. When I stepped into leadership, I was very young. I was completely unproven. There were many voices, many opinions, many doubts, and you could have stood back with skepticism. You could have kept your distance, but instead you stood beside me. You believed in me before many others did. You defended me. You strengthened me. You gave me credibility when I had not yet earned it. And it is in large part because of your steadfastness that the ministry held together through that transition. After Reinhard stopped traveling, it was you and me on the field together for years.
Yeah.
Crusade after crusade, nation after nation. You were my sounding board, my counselor, my encourager, my protector, and my friend. We've walked through joy together.
Yes.
We have walked through grief together.
Yeah.
We have laughed and cried together.
Yes.
We've carried the gospel together around the world. And you have been many things to me over the years, at times like a father, at times like a brother, at times like a mentor, at times simply a loyal friend who stayed when others might have walked away. And I just want to say publicly today that I love you, I honor you, and I thank God for you.
Wow. My goodness me. Goodness me.
That serves as both a little heartfelt note from me, and also I think an introduction to you as the man who really has helped to hold Christ for All Nations together for all of these many years. And I can't wait to talk to you about your story. So here's what I've done is I've gone through your book and Reinhard's book, and I've got a few different excerpts that I want to read to you and just get your reaction to those things. And then you can tell us some of the exciting backstory. So here's the first one for you, okay? And this is going to seem like it's a little bit out of left field, but this is actually a quote from a poet. You probably know it by heart. That's written in the front of one of the sections of your book. And this is the poem. Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced the skies on laughter-silvered wings. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds and done 100 things you have not dreamed of, wheeled and soared and swung. That's John Gillespie Meiji, I think.
Yes.
So, Peter, one of the things that you've always loved is flying.
That's right. Yes, it's been a passion of mine, actually, and still is. Yeah.
How did that get started for you?
Well, I'm really not sure, because in my family, my dad never did anything like that. He was an engineer, a technician, and a businessman, but we never did stuff like that together. There was nobody else who was interested in aviation whatsoever, and I was fascinated, I guess. And of course, I started building little model airplanes out of balsa wood and glue, as we did in those days. And flew them, and then on just as a small kid, until flying little airplanes with engines. We called them control line flying, and it just kind of gripped my imagination. And I never thought it would be anything more than just fiddling around with little toy airplanes. But that turned out to be a image, if you like, or a picture of my life. Yeah. Because right at the beginning, I never thought I'd ever do anything out of the ordinary. I was just a kid in a little country in Zimbabwe, and it should have been like many, many others. But somehow the excitement of reaching into the unknown and experimenting with things that were new has always fascinated me. And that worked in aviation. Mm-hmm. Later on, it worked in ministry and in things spiritual as well. Yeah.
And you, to this day, you still are hang gliding?
That's right. I'm still an active hang glider pilot, believe it or not. I started way back in 1978, probably before a lot of people listening were born. And I was a hang glider pilot, and I still am. I'm now, 78, nearly 79. And not many guys my age, my peers, are still doing it, Yeah. They want to, but physically they somehow can't manage it. And by God's grace, I really don't know why, I'm still able to do it, I know I'm old. I haven't got the stamina and the strength that I had. And on a hang glider, you have to sprint to take off. You've got to give your aircraft airspeed on the ground.
Yeah, I don't think many people realize the amount of physical exertion.
So you've got to work hard to sprint. So, I always say to the other pilots, I said, how many people do you know who are 78 years old and who run? I said, not only don't run, but running's not enough. I need to sprint. And
with a big thing,
carrying the hang glider, sprint and into the wind and down the hill. And the joke is, I said, I realize that people my age, it's not that you can't run, but we never do, so you'll forget. And what I found, I had to go and do it before launching the hang glider, when nobody was looking, everything was ready. I would sneak off into the bush, and nobody would object, because usually with hang glider pilots, they've got adrenaline and they need to go and relieve themselves, in behind the trees. So I sneak off, but not to relieve myself, but when nobody's looking, to do a practice run. And I literally run, and it's not enough.
Make sure you're still working.
Yeah, and I say, no, put your toes down, use your toes, sprint. And then when I can sprint, I come back casual, pick up the hang glider and say, okay, and I sprint and take off.
That's amazing. And so, hang gliding and also piloting a plane, a Cessna plane.
Powered
we'll talk more
aircraft,
about that.
yes. I actually built a little aircraft, an experimental aircraft, with other people's help, and operated it for many years. On the technical side, I loved that.
Yeah.
And it's fully aerobatic. I enjoyed aerobatics.
Yeah.
So, yes, a lot of aviation. Flew the CFAN plane around all over Africa, from as far south as Cape Town to beyond the equator, right up in Kenya, and everywhere in between. I thoroughly enjoyed that.
And just as a side note, I think this is just an interesting thing about you is you're hang gliding still at 78, right?
Yep.
Soon to be 79.
Yeah, 8 weeks away.
Yeah. And you're also, every morning, you're kayaking.
That's right, I do.
You're dirt biking.
Yes.
You're fishing all the time. And not just fishing, you're doing like the fly fishing with the big, long...
That's right, double-handed spey casting, which is pretty heavy work.
I seem to remember Reinhard saying something to you like, Peter's never going to grow up.
It's true. Actually, what happened is the team were together after some event, and we were just standing around talking, and one of the younger guys did something really good, and I used the line which I've used many times since. I said, "Man, when I grow up, I want to be like you." And Reinhard, without hesitating, just popped in and said, "Peter, you'll never grow up."
And that's a great compliment.
I said to him, "Reinhard, that is the greatest compliment you've ever given me."
That's awesome. All right, so I want to talk to you a little bit about the origin story and where all this originated for you. So let me just read you an excerpt from your book. By the way, I'm going to be reading a lot of little excerpts from Peter's book here, Into the Unknown. This is very unlike a lot of ministers' books, because this is not just preaching stuff. This is exciting adventures, life experience, and the journey that you've been on.
Well, actually, when as the years went by, there were people in the ministry, like Reinhard wrote many books, like yourself, many books, and others. And people always said to me, "You should write a book. You should write a book." And I always said, No. I never said to them why I didn't want to, but I said no. And then eventually, when it came time, and it looked like I was going to write the book, I said, "You know what's going to happen?" I said, "Reinhard Bonnke, Daniel Kolenda, and others have written these wonderful, many spiritual books, absolutely super." I said, "My book will be like a Christian version of Indiana Jones." And I think it kind of turned out like that.
And in some ways, that's more interesting anyways. Hey guys, I've got something really special for you today. Our monthly ministry partners are the backbone of Christ for All Nations. Their faithful generosity is what helps us to preach the gospel all over the world and to reach the lost and to plan for every crusade that's ahead. Now, maybe you've been watching this podcast for a while and you've never taken the step to become one of our monthly ministry partners. Well, today is your opportunity. You can become a monthly ministry partner by clicking the link in the description of this video. And if you do that today, we're going to send you a signed copy of Peter Vandenberg's book, Into the Unknown, as a thank you gift. Just click the link below and become a monthly partner today. We'll send you your signed copy, and thank you in advance for helping us to take the gospel to the nations. All right, so here is a little excerpt here. It says, "Nothing in my childhood in the sleepy, sun-baked backwater of Zimbabwe gave any hint of future adventures and global travel in pursuit of God's calling. Like any boy in a tropical country, my days were spent finding new ways to torment my two older sisters and happily shooting things with my trusty rubber catapult. Home in Harare was a happy, stable place. All our needs were met by industrious parents who labored to build a successful motoring business and a comfortable family life."
Yeah.
So you weren't born into the home of a pastor, or?
Well, my dad wasn't a pastor, but he was a senior elder in the church, and all my life that he was doing that. He saw pastors come and pastors go, and he always held everything together. It was kind of Mr. Van, they called him, short for Vandenberg. It's way too big a name. So Mr. Van had that status, and so he was a pillar in the church, And my mom as well, active, and she ran the Sunday school. So they were solid Pentecostal Christians and powerful church members, and when they became wealthier and the business was good, they were also huge financial supporters of God's work. Lessons that as a kid, I never realized it, but I was learning. I was watching them.
You would have learned business.
Yes.
The mechanics part of your...
Highly technical, yes.
And you were working on motor vehicles?
Well, yeah, because my dad had this family dealership in the country we lived in that meant everything. New car sales, used car sales, servicing, workshops, rental businesses, car rental businesses. And so it went without saying, I was the only son, and I had a technical leaning anyway, that I would end up running the business. And so, I immersed myself in that. I did all the examinations in those days, all our examinations from the United Kingdom, City and Guilds, it's called. I did a mechanic certificate, technician certificate. I ended up doing a chartered degree for the Institute of the Motor Industry. So I went as far as I could go in the academic side, but then eventually took over the business. My dad sort of started stepping back, and by the time I was 27, I think, or 26, I think by the time I was 26, I was already the managing director of the business and really running it. And my dad had gone into semi-retirement,
And all those skills would come back into play much later on.
They would, actually. It's true because, years later when we went to Bible school, of course, that's another story. It's in there. I felt the call of God and spoke to my parents, and I thought my dad would say, I've retired. And I thought my mom, who was the chief accountant in the business, that she would, hey, say, you're crazy, you'll ruin the business. Well, God bless them. My mom, she just said, do it. Go, do it in Jesus' name. And I figured that she would say that. But then I looked at my dad. He's a very quiet guy. He never spoke much. I guess I didn't get those genes. But I looked at my dad, and he was sitting there, and I said, well, Dad, what are your feelings? And then he looked at me and he said, I'm going to tell you a story I'd never heard. He said, I was he was a managing director of another company before he started his own business, very, very well known in the industry, high. And he said, I felt the Lord spoke to me about going into ministry. And he said, but I said to myself, I need to have money before I can do that. You need money for that. So he said, so I left the work I was doing and went farming. Now, in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe at that time, tobacco farming was the massive industry. They grew the best Virginia tobacco on earth, and it was a multi-billion-dollar industry. And he went farming and planted tobacco, of all things, as a Christian man. But the first year, the crop failed. The second year, the crop failed, and he was out of business. And so he came back to the motor industry, and they became very, very successful. Vandenberg Holdings, our family company, I think had 7 different businesses, and all doing very, very well. But he never went into ministry. And then he looked at me and he said, don't you make the same mistake.
Wow.
And I thought, wow. I was deeply moved because I said, Dad, I've thought about how it'll happen. I'm going to cut off all the unprofitable bits in our business conglomerate and cut it down to the most profitable, and then it'll be easier for you to run. Cut a long story short, they agreed. Vange and I sold up everything, our house, our cars, boats. I sold my shares in the business to them, and off we went to theological college in England, because most people in Rhodesia went to South Africa, but the colleges there used Afrikaans. It's like a Dutch language, which I didn't speak. So we had to go to England, which I didn't like, because we were at war with England. Yeah. Our country had declared independence. We tried to do what the Americans did and told them, the Brits, to push off. It didn't work. And so we were at war with them. So now I've got to go to England, And we did that. We sold up everything and went to England. And then later on went to do music ministry, singing and preaching the gospel. And while we were doing that, I said to Vangie, I wonder why the Lord wasted so much of my time in all this engineering training and then business management, running the business, and then some pastoral work around that. I wonder why he wasted my time on that. Well, as you just commented, when I felt the call of God to join Reinhard and CFAN from our own ministry, which was going gangbusters at the time, and I felt to do it, and then when I arrived at CFAN, I found that like 95% of the people in CFAN were technicians. Yeah. And I spoke their language, and they spoke my language. We had the same blood group, and my predecessor, who'd been the manager, or whatever we called him, the general coordinator of CFAN, he when he left CFAN, he went and became a professor. He was a high mind, but he didn't understand tech guys. He didn't talk their language. He didn't even know how they thought. I knew exactly how they felt. And then the pastoral work that I'd done came into place. The business management, which we'd done at CFAN, we ran like a business, although it's a ministry, but we wanted to be accountable and still are to this day, even to ECFA standards. And all of it, suddenly I realized it all came into place. And I said, man, the Lord didn't waste 1 minute of my experience.
Isn't it interesting how many times looking back at your life, I have the same experience where
I'm sure
when you're going through things at different stages, it all kind of seems random.
Yeah.
And then when you look back at it, you realize it all fit together in this beautiful way that you could never have engineered. Yeah. And in some ways, those early lessons that you learned, whether it be as a mechanic, they came back into play. But also, I would, just having conversations with you in the past, I know that even the ways that you learned to hear the Lord, like in the beginning, when you got saved, when you got called into ministry, those things are still lessons that you carry with you today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that was really key because, I became a Christian. Actually, I got saved only about, Evangie and I were engaged to be married. She was a daughter of a pastor and a wonderful Christian. I was an agnostic. I opened. I'd looked at all the Christian thing in my family. And
so you grew up in the church with strong Christian parents,
absolutely.
But you were not.
Singing the songs, and I loved the songs. I loved singing, and I loved it all. But what I didn't like, and this is what I looked at the Christians, my friends actually, and many of them stayed friends right through my years as an agnostic. But I looked at them and I thought, they don't ask the hard questions. This is how I viewed it. I obviously, as so many people, maybe many listening, I was wrestling with the tension between faith and reason. And for me, the faith seemed unreasonable. So I had this agnostic view, and I thought, the Christians, my friends, and my parents, people I loved and honored, that I said they didn't ask the hard questions. They just were refused. And I thought, I'm going to ask the hard questions. And I built this philosophy of my own, which I thought was very, very clever and watertight and answered everything. By the way, I knew the Christian doctrines very, very well, so I could argue against the Christians marvelously and shoot them down. And I thought, every time this happened, I said, yeah, you see, they don't ask the hard questions. But there was one thing which I could never figure out. One of the dear friends, they were a couple, a young man and his wife. He and I were good friends. We modified cars together. We did racing together, fishing and all sorts. But I saw in them, in him and in his wife and their family, I would describe it like a contented peacefulness, which I didn't have with all my super watertight perfect philosophy that just absolutely on the money, and I could defend it in against anybody really, but I lacked that contentment and peace that they had, and I thought, well, it must be just a character. But then I looked at others, and even some I thought, they don't think much, they're not that intelligent, but all of them had this contentment and peace that I didn't have. And I thought, well, there we go. Anyhow, I met Evangeline, we got engaged, and we were engaged for 9 months, and I was an agnostic. And she, I don't know what her comments are, she'd have to say for herself, but she'd had a man and his wife, young couple from their church in South Africa. Her dad was a pastor of a big, big church in Johannesburg. They'd gone to Bible school in America, and then they'd come back, and they were doing a kind of a tour around South Africa and Rhodesia, preaching, I guess, to help them get going, And Vangie said, they're coming to the little church, our family church, in the midweek. Please go and listen. So I said, sure, for my beloved. Of course, my lovely girl, I'll do that, So I went and I sat down in the meeting. And, of course, people in the church knew me. They were surprised to see I'd come in the midweek meeting. And he started preaching, and I did what I always did. It wasn't a very good message, and I pulled it apart, and he was self-contradictory in places, and he was making statements about things that had no background. So I took it all apart, thinking, oh well, that's okay, it's okay. And then when it came to the end, he made an altar call, which I'd heard many, many times. I thought, oh yeah, I know about that. It's make you feel like really lousy, and come on, put your hand up and come forward. So I'm sitting there, and he makes the altar call, and he makes it. Nobody's coming forward, nothing's happening. And I'm thinking to myself, hey, guy, it's enough now. Let's close this. We need to get going. But he didn't. He just kept going and kept going, kept going. And at first I thought, oh, well, I guess he's a persistent guy. I'll give him that, And then as I sat there, something happened inside of me. Suddenly, it's like I said to myself, he's saying, come forward and kneel at the front. Go and do it. And I thought, get out of here. And I thought, yeah, I myself was telling myself, do it. So I thought, what can happen? And I got up and I walked and knelt down and he came down. I don't know what happened to the rest of the church. I think they went home. And I couldn't believe it. I began to sob like a baby. I mean, this didn't happen in my world, of men, especially young men. No way. I sobbed uncontrollably. I thought, get a grip of yourself, guy. And I knew I'd had an amazing encounter with God. I figured. I wasn't even sure, So he prayed, and I went home, and I thought, I'll be okay tomorrow. What was that, And I thought, I'll be okay tomorrow morning. I'll forget it all, And I won't even tell anybody, they'll all think, oh, well. I woke up in the morning and guess what? I had contentment and peace. And I thought, how did this work? Where did this come from? And I knew something had changed inside. Of course, now I know it was the Holy Spirit. And I couldn't explain it. And I went on with it. I wrote a letter to Angie and said, I went to the meeting and you won't believe it. I went and knelt at the front and sobbed like a baby. I don't know why. And that was it. My life was changed. That was 3 months before we were married.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And then when you had that call into ministry, which would have been how many years later?
Well, Evangelist and I served in the church. Let me think now. 60, it'll be about 2 years we were active. And I was active. I jumped in, boots and all, which I guess is my character. I served on every committee in the church, except the women's committee. In those days, we knew the difference, So I was active. And then people would always say, yeah, you should go and be a preacher. And I thought, come on, leave me alone. I'm running a business and it's fully engaging and it's a huge challenge. And I'm active in the church. It's fine. But then in the little church, it wasn't a big church, maybe 200 members, but amazingly enough, a number of young married couples had gone to Bible school. I think 4 out of this little church, and they all went to America because there was a local American missionary there, and he connected them with Zion Bible Institute, I think in Maine, somewhere like that. And they all went there, and they'd come back. And I, of course, asking them, I said, what happened? Well, God spoke to us. I said, what? Did you hear a voice? No. Well, how did he speak to you? Well, they just gave different sort of, to me, airy-fairy answers but everybody kept saying, the Lord spoke to me, the Lord spoke. So I said, Evangelie, I don't get this, the Lord spoke to me thing. Let's go through the Bible from Genesis to the end, and I want to mark every place where God spoke to people. So I did. I went through the Old Testament, and of course, God spoke from the mountain. He spoke from the rock. He spoke from a burning bush. He whispered behind the prophet's ear. He wrote stuff on a wall, but none of that was useful to me, So, well, and then we got to the New Testament, and there wasn't a heck of a lot about God speaking, in the New Testament. So I went through it, and then I read something in Acts where they were going to send people out, and the leaders got together. And they said, it says in the Word of God, it seemed right to them to send the people out. And I thought, seemed? They didn't know for sure. And I thought, I could identify with that. If something seems right to me, even in business or whatever, you have a go, And so spiritually I thought, well, I'll try that. And so, but then I mentioned that Evangeline and I talked. She said, yeah, well, let's do that, and life went on. And then just maybe 2 weeks later, we were getting ready to go to church on a Sunday morning. There was another young couple in our church. He was a bank manager, although he was only like a year or two older than me. So a very successful young man, and his wife, Val. And you know how it is with young couples in church. You kind of look at yourself and say, are we better off than them, or are they better off? So I looked at him. I thought financially they're better off than we are, although we were not doing badly, but they were better off. And getting ready to go to church in the morning, I felt a word or a voice or whatever you want to call it in me saying, give him $20. Roy was his name. Said, give Roy $20. And I thought, what? Where did that come from? And I thought, nah. And then I just had this strong feeling. I call it now like I'd eaten too much cheese. It was like in my stomach. It was a feeling. It wouldn't go away. So I thought, and then I spoke to myself, said, does it seem right? And yeah, it seems, why not? Why not give a guy $20? It seemed, well, are you going to try it or not? So I said, I'll try it. So I put the $20. Now, $20 is not a lot of money, and that bugged me. If it was $200, I would have been much more willing, but 20. So I put it in my pocket. We went to church. Meeting went on. I saw Roy and Val with their kids there and the baby, and we were this side with our baby. And then church finished, and we had to get all our baby Schrott, as I call it, in German for baby junk, carried all to the car. And then when then I looked up and the church was empty. Oh, Val and them were gone. Oh, well, that was a silly idea anyway. I have $20 stay in my pocket. So in the car, Evangelist said, I left my handbag under the pew. So I go back in. I'm getting the handbag, empty church. I look up, there's Roy. His wife left something. And in here it said, does it seem right? And I thought, seem right. So I put my hand in my pocket and Roy said, hey, Peter. I walked towards him. I crumpled the $20 up because I was embarrassed. It's not a lot of money. So I just walked to him, but in my hand I said, Roy, I want you to have this. And he put his hand out and I let go. And I just turned around and I walked away because, I was really embarrassed. And as I walked away, he shouted, Pete! And I stopped, turned back. And there he was standing holding the thing with tears in his eyes. He said, why did you do that? I said, well, Roy, I'm looking at God's leading and it seemed right. And I had this cheesy feeling in my stomach. He said, Val and I are about to make a life-changing decision. He said, and I know we shouldn't ask for a sign from the Lord, but I said to the Lord, Lord, please, just to comfort my worriedness and lack of faith, let something very unusual happen to me in church this Sunday that's never happened before. And you came and gave me $20 bill. Turns out they were about to change their life and go to Bible school. And they did. And he became a very successful pastor. But they retired. I think he's already died. He's older than me. And it changed their lives. And when I went and told Vangie, I said, that's how it works. It seemed right. Well, there was an ongoing process. And I was open to it now. And it was always around finance. I'm not even sure why. And bigger and bigger and bigger amounts, And every time I did it, there was some encouraging sign that it was the right thing, Perhaps not as extravagant as Roy and Val, but also very, 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 very good.
And that same cheesy feeling.
Same cheesy feeling. And I soon learned to know the difference between cheese and what I realized was the Holy Spirit talking to me. But it still felt like a cheesy feeling in the stomach, And so then this all happened and it went on well. And then we were, as I said, our country was under United Nations sanctions because we told the Brits to get lost, and so the Brits were technically at war.
Rhodesia.
Yeah. The Brits were technically at war with us, and so they sanctions. They'd shut down everything, and our Vandenberg Holdings company had shareholders, which my parents had bought out, and I'd bought out many. There was one shareholder left. She was in England, and she wanted out, but she was not allowed to do business with us. So we couldn't change from a public company to a private company, which we needed to do because we were now stuck with So I guess the people like her in England must have complained to their government and said, look, we want out. Can't you just open a window where we can do business and then shut it again? And they said, yep. So it was going to be a 2-week window coming up in some months where people could buy and sell shares or anything else for that matter, and then it would be closed. And there was $5,000 she held of shares. That was a lot of money in those days. I mean, I was a managing director earning $400 a month. So $5,000 was serious money. So I said, I'll buy it. I had money saved. I need to save some more. I'll buy the shares. And then my dad, who was head of the Gideons for many, many years, amongst all these other Christian stuff, was going to go to America for a Gideons conference. Now I'm talking, what am I talking? I'm talking mid-60s. Going to America, I was in propeller aircraft, he left in a propeller plane and later on got in a jet somewhere, I think. But anyway, and no telephones. You couldn't phone. I guess you could, but it was so expensive that they were gone. So they were going to go they would be away during this 2-week period. So I said, I've got the money and it's all good. The lawyers standing by, and off they went to America. And here we are. And about a month before the 2-week window opened, a missionary visits our church. We knew him very, very well. And he's talking about they built a massive Bible college for the Africans, and it was a wonderful thing. And he's telling the story, and then he says, we nearly finished. He said, but we can't finish the roof on the main auditorium there yet because we're short of $5,000. Man, and I got the cheesy feeling. That's garbage. And he said, that's all we need, $5,000. And he left it. It wasn't fundraising. It was in his message. And I got the cheesy feeling. And then at the end, he said, I'm going to raise money to see how much we need to get money for this roof, So, and the pastor kindly said we can do an offering. Man, I tore the back page out of my Bible, which was a blank page, or it had some publishing, tore it out, and I wrote on there, Pete and Vangie, I owe you $5,000. And I stuck it in, when the offering thing, I stuck it in. I thought, it's okay, I've got the money. And, that'll work. The final hymn hadn't even finished, and the missionary stood right in front of me, and he knew me, and he said, what is this? I said, that's what it is. I'll give you a check tomorrow. So we wrote the check out, gave it to him tomorrow, and Vangie said, what about the shares? No, I said, I'll go to the bank manager, I'll borrow it from him, and we'll pay it back. That's no problem. So off I go to the bank, and he says, I said, this is what I need to do. I've got these shares. Yeah. He said, he knows. I didn't tell him I gave away the money, but I said, I need help. Oh, yes, he said, we can put up $5,000, but I can't give it to you because you're a junior director or something. There was some legal reason. I said, but I can give it to your dad. Tell him to come in. Oh, no. I said, he's in America. Oh, well, then your mom, she's also, no, she's with him. I said, yeah, I can't do it. I said, can't I sign on their behalf? And no. He said, you're a junior director. He said, I'm sorry, I just cannot do it. Man, and I walked out of there and I thought, now I've ruined the whole show now, boy. I started rehearsing my story to the folks saying, I really felt that God spoke to me.
To get the money back.
And I gave the money away and I couldn't buy the shares and I ruined the time. I was rehearsing it and the lawyer phoned me. He said, there's 3 weeks to go. I said, no, it's okay. I'll bring it. 1 week before, he said, look, I need time to get this in order. In fact, he said, I need this money in the next 2 or 3 days. Otherwise, we can't get the documentation prepared. And I said to Vangie, I've ruined everything. And then the next morning in the mail arrived a letter from the IRS in Rhodesia. I thought, oh, that's all I need. Now I haven't paid enough tax. And oh, my word, it's mounting up. And I first didn't even open the letter. And then after I opened it, can you believe they said there'd been a mistake with my tax ever since I started working. And they said, and in there was a government check for $5,000.
Wow.
Couldn't believe it. I took it and phoned the lawyer. I'm coming. I said, I know it's late, so I brought a government guaranteed check. Oh, he said, that's brilliant. Boom, 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 bang, bang. That all went, and I was now I'm flying. I said to Vangie, this is the ultimate for God's leading for us. It can't get bigger than this. It can't get more dangerous than this or need more commitment. This is the absolute ultimate. This is it. Boy, was I wrong. Because 8 months later, a preacher stood in our church in a midweek service, and he preached from the book of Hosea, break up the fallow ground. He said, the field with the weeds and tares. He said, this is the mission field. And he said, the very best are needed to come and knock these tares down and preach the gospel in the mission field. He said, and I'm going to make a call for people. He said, if you've already stood up 3 times for such a call, then don't stand up. Go and buy a suitcase and go. But if you haven't, then I'm going to call you to it. And I got the cheesy feeling. And I thought, I never stood up for things like that. I mean, discretion is a better part of valor. I was skeptical. I stood up, and then I felt Vangie stand up next to me and take my hand. And then we stood there, and he prayed the prayer. And you know who that was? It was Reinhard Bonnke.
Wow.
He was a young missionary touring church to church, talking about his work. We'd never spoke to him. We never saw him again. The next day, it was a Sunday, sorry. The next Monday, I went straight to the American missionary who knew us and knew my parents. I said, this is what God just spoke to us. What do we do? He said, go and speak to your parents. Go and speak to your parents. So I went, and I've already mentioned what they said. They said, go for it. We sold up everything. Within 5 months, I had a wife and 3 children. Our baby was 10 months old, man. Just a little runny-nosed thing, Now we got to go to England. And we did. We sold up everything. We got on and off we went to England. I'd hardly left Rhodesia. I'd been to South Africa and Zambia and Mozambique. That's about it. Never left Africa. And we went, and well, the rest is history.
Hey guys, I've got something really special for you today. Our monthly ministry partners are the backbone of Christ for All Nations. Their faithful generosity is what helps us to preach the gospel all over the world and to reach the lost and to plan for every crusade that's ahead. Now, maybe you've been watching this podcast for a while and you've never taken the step to become one of our monthly ministry partners. Well, today is your opportunity. You can become a monthly ministry partner by clicking the link in the description of this video. And if you do that today, we're going to send you a signed copy of Peter Vandenberg's book, Into the Unknown, as a thank you gift. Just click the link below and become a monthly partner today. We'll send you your signed copy and thank you in advance for helping us to take the gospel to the nations. And there, when you were in South Africa or in England at Bible school, you guys started a group called Rufaro.
That's right.
Which is a singing group.
Yes.
And then you ended up leading the songs at a meeting where Reinhard Bonnke was
Yes,
preaching.
The group is called Rufaro, which is a Shona word like shalom. It's also the name of a beer in Zimbabwe, but I didn't mention that then. But it means like shalom, or peace. So we were a close harmony trio, Vangie, myself, and her brother Oliver, and we cut 5 albums in the time we were active. We were the top-selling gospel artists in the UK for a number of years. That doesn't mean much, but anyway, we were, and. So we went from church to church. We felt our music, and we were good, was a draw, and then we preached. Oliver was a preacher. I was a preacher. We'd preach the gospel, get people saved. And the Lord gave us great success, especially with the young people. So this is what we did. And I did all the booking and ran the ministry and what have you. And the pastors around, we were working in the Elam churches and the Assemblies of God, and then later in the Charismatic Renewal, Baptist churches and Anglican Charismatic churches. We were very instrumental in the beginnings of the Charismatic Renewal in England because we came as Pentecostals. We weren't messing about. Pray for healing for the sick and baptism of the Holy Spirit, the whole lot. So pastors knew, because many had tried it in big churches. They wanted us to come and minister and sing, but we were already booked some little church, and I point blank refused ever to drop one church to go to another, especially a little one to go to a big one, because I said, the fact that we're there, I believe, is the leading of the Holy Spirit. So this guy phoned me and he said, I know it's only in a few months' time, and we were booked up like 8 months ahead. We were doing 400 meetings a year, by the way. Wow. On the road. So we were going at it. And he said, I know you booked up. He said, but we have a special opportunity in Birmingham, which is the second city of England. He said, we have got for the first time ever the City Hall to preach a gospel crusade. And we've got it for 5 nights. And I have a visiting evangelist. And we want Rufaro to come and convene the meeting, run everything, do everything. And the preacher will preach. I said, oh, who's the preacher? He said, oh, he's a German guy called Reinhard Bonnke. I said, yeah, I know him. I met him once. I didn't say that I'm now in ministry because of him. And I said, well, look, Richard, let me see what I can do. And so I talked to the other churches 5 or 6 days and told them when they heard City Hall in Birmingham, they said, give us another date. They all backed out. I gave other dates, and we went and we worked alongside Reinhard Bonnke for 5 days. And we did everything basically, and handled the prayer stuff, and he preached, and it was wonderful. I never said a word to him that I felt God is prompting me to be a part of his ministry. That's another story.
Did you get that cheesy feeling again?
I had got the cheesy feeling on that one. In fact, we were in 2 old ladies who we call the Birmingham grannies. They loved our kids. They loved us. She needed, in one of the days when we were home, and we were not home a lot, she needed a piece of new furniture assembled. That's how it was in Britain. It was all flat packed. You'd put it together. It was a cupboard in a bedroom. So we went to do it. Vangie was drinking tea. The kids were playing with the grannies, and I was fixing this thing up. And on her bed lay an open magazine, a thing called Revival Report from Reinhard Bonnke. It was a light, thin paper for travel by air. And it was open, a picture of trucks, and it said, we're building the biggest tent in the world, and we need to buy 7 or 8 trucks from Gaddafi, who's got military surplus. And I was interested in that, tech stuff. So I looked at it, and as I looked at it, I felt the Lord spoke to me and said, you have a role to play in that ministry. And I thought, no. We were doing great. I thought, if this happened when we were fighting with each other or when there was no money, but we were at the top of our game, in the ministry and everything. And I couldn't get that thing out of. Eventually, I shut the book, the page. No, so I finished the thing, and I went back and opened it. I said, I talked to evangelists. I said, I had the cheesy feeling. And so, eventually we talked with Oliver. And then before that, in the 5 days of meetings, the last night, I said to Reinhard, he was staying in some people's house. That's how it was in those days, no hotels. I said, can I come and talk to you about something? Yeah, sure. So I went round there, like now, 10:30 at night, the last night of the Crusade's done, and I told him what I felt, that the Holy Spirit said to me, have a role to play. He said, I don't need a preacher, and don't need a singer. He said, there's no place for you, nothing. A very uncomfortable silence. I said, well, I really felt the prompting of the Holy Spirit. He said, it's nothing. He said, I don't need a preacher. I don't need a singer. He said, there's absolutely nothing. So, oh, well, I guess I better go. And as I stood up to go, he said, there's one thing, but it's nothing for you. I said, what is that? He said, our transport department is a disaster, and I need somebody to come and change it. I said, Reinhard, that's my background. That's my world until the last 4 years when he'd been in ministry. And he said, would you come and do that? I said, yes. He said, hold on. He was going to Norway. He said, I'm in Norway for a week. I'll call you at the end of the week and see what you think. He called, said, do you still feel it? I said, more than ever. I'd had a couple of things happen which confirmed that we should change. And we sold up everything, and because we were musicians and in a foreign country, I'd bought Vangie a Kruger Rand that she hung on her neck, solid gold thing as future security, fancy gold earrings, diamond earrings would be bought in Kimberley, and they were for our retirement. We sold a lot, put our family on the plane, flew to Johannesburg and joined Christ for All Nations.
Wow. And you showed up in overalls and
toolbox. There was the workshop. It was a disaster, all right. I always joke and say when I joined CFAN, it was like the Book of Judges. Everybody did what was right in their own eyes, And so, I didn't worry about that. I'm going to get in the workshop. So I emptied everything out, repainted the floor. Vangie and I on hands and knees with rollers, painted the concrete floor. I established controls of the cars. There were no controls on servicing, on use. Everybody just grabbed a vehicle and drove, and the trucks, I put it all down. It's got to be serviced at this time. When you take it out, you sign. When you bring it back in, you sign it. And so it put structure. Actually, I realized later, the first structure actually there was in CFAN. And then we were sitting in a weekly meeting, which Reinhard had, where just about everybody came. Anybody who thought they had something to say. It was not, they came, and basically the discussion was about things that went wrong, and there's something that I would say this didn't work well, and then everybody would start ducking and diving and blaming somebody else. That was how it worked, and it
still works that way sometimes, if we're honest.
I guess so. And then we had a Bible van. It was an old Chev truck with a big shopping thing on, and we had an American couple came, and they kicked it into new gear. The book selling, it had always been terrible, and it was really good, but it relied on this truck, which kept breaking down. So I pulled it in and overhauled it myself. The engine overhauled the transmission, resprayed it, overhauled the suspension, brakes, everything. It was like a new vehicle. And off we went. 2 weeks later, it conked out again. So now the meeting's on, They said, well, and Aubrey, the guy said, this truck's rubbish, we need a new truck. It broke down, and it came a day late to the crusade. And then said, why did that happen? Well, they were waiting for the dodging. And then I said, I can tell you what happened. It was my fault. I said, I did everything on that truck, but I never drained the tank. And it had some rust stuff in it. It's blocked the filter. I've already fixed it. It will never block it again. That was my mistake totally, and I've repaired it. And there was silence, Nobody knew what to do with that, Somebody actually took the blame. Well, the truck worked beautifully, and then shortly after that, I'm in the workshop, in the overalls, and we were building the big tent. When I say we, CFAN itself, we had an industrial site. At that time, 80 men working on building the largest mobile structure on earth, and there were problems. So the engineer, he was a great guy, but it was all not going well. There were guys he wanted to shoot people. He was crazy. So I see Reinhard walking across from the main office to my workshop now. Now it's all running like a clockwork. I've still got blue overalls on, of course, but everything's clean and cars are working and there's accountability. which had never been. One guy, accountant in one of those meetings said, yet another car driven through a red traffic light and we've got to pay $100. So, and then Reinhard said, well, who? He said, well, we don't know. It was the van. And I said, which vehicle? He said, one of the minibuses. I said, well, what day? He told me. What time? He told me. I said, I can tell you. And I went and looked. I said, that was Tommy Sidon, our gospel singer. He checked it out an hour before and he checked it in 2 hours later. He drove to a red light. Reinhard said, he must pay. Well, that changed everything. So now Reinhard comes marching across, and I can see by the way he's walking that this is not a stroll. You know? So I said, morning, Reinhard. He said, I want you to come with me now. We're going over to the main office. And we had a loudspeaker system. We all lived on a compound. And the tannoy said, everybody, come to the reception area, everybody. And I said, what? He said, come. So we walk and we stand there. And Reinhard says, well, he said, I've got an announcement to make. He said, from now on, Peter is going to be I think we call it the general manager or the general coordinator of CFAN. And all the stuff you're asking about, go to him and he will handle it. Is there any question? And there was no question. So I said, hallelujah. And he went to his office. And there I stood. So I went and sat in my office next to his, a big office with a telephone in my overalls. And I sat there. Nobody came. So I'm going back to the workshop. So I went back to the workshop and I was fiddling around with stuff. And then I see people coming. They'd gone to run it. What about this? Go to Peter. Well, that was it. Then I quickly took off the overalls and put on fancy clothes and moved into that office, and I was running it ever since.
Wow. What a story. Here's how Reinhard wrote about that. In his book, Living a Life of Fire, he said, a few months later, Peter showed up in Johannesburg. He had his coveralls and a large supply of tools. We prayed together about his assignment. Then I took him to the workshop and showed him the fleet of cars and trucks. There was much work to be done, and he began immediately. Soon after he arrived, I began to notice improvements. Every vehicle was given regular maintenance schedule. The buying of tires, fuel, and supplies was streamlined and made more efficient. He power washed and painted the floor in the garage.
It's true.
Vehicles were given assigned parking spaces. He organized meticulous charts for their use. Someone made responsible for their every movement. One day, I remember telling Annie, I think God has placed a goldfish in our pond. I heard him say that so many times. You were the goldfish in the pond. And that was the beginning of a journey that, how many years were you in that role? 40-something.
Yes, I'm 45 years.
45
since
years.
I started with CFAN. And what was interesting is, because then, of course, every question was coming my way. Now I'm sitting in this office, and eventually I had got a secretary. We didn't have PAs in those days. We had a secretary, and people were coming in 30-minute interviews all day long, from 8 in the morning through lunchtime to the evening, and it was, you can't believe the questions. One would be there and saying, must we spend, what in those days, $20,000 on a new vehicle, and you know, and it's going to do this and this, and then I'll handle that. The next one will be 2 technicians, and there's a big argument. Do we use spring washers or flat washers? And the one German guy said, we got to use spring washers. And the other guy said, no, we got to use flat washers. And I said, what? And I'd say, look, we use flat washers. Next, the whole day. And I thought, this is crazy. This is no way to run anything, you know. So I looked for the individuals that looked like they were kind of alpha individuals or dominant in their area, accounting, in Cascade organizing, in the technical, in the tent building. And I said, you department head, I made them department heads. And I said, we will meet once a week on a Monday. Not everybody, we will meet. And then I said, you handle the problems. And if you can't handle them, then come to me and you and I will handle them together. So I made department heads, and those department heads eventually became national directors who themselves have department heads who have 5 people working under them. So it puts structure.
And that's the structure we still operate under today.
Yes, it's
that
true.
You put in place all those years ago.
Yeah, we're incorporated in 10 countries around the world now. Huh?
So one of the big projects that you worked on in the beginning was this tent.
Yes.
And again, I think your technical expertise came in handy there too.
Well, what was interesting, I mean, I was not a mechanical engineer in that sense. I was an automotive engineer and aviation. So, but this was mechanical engineering pure. And it was, when I say we were building it, I don't mean, people say we're building this, but they're hiring a company basically. And that's what you would. No, we were not. There was no company could do that in South Africa. So we had a big industrial site in the industrial area.
Just so people understand, let me read this. The Big Tent was a record-breaking mobile structure that required innovative approaches for practically everything. When complete, it would seat 34,000 people under 17,000 square meters of fabric.
Correct.
27 meters high, which for the Americans is what, like 90 feet
90
almost.
feet high. The towers, there were 8 of them, and they were 90 feet high. You could climb up the middle of the tower to get.
And I mean, these things you had to drill and put concrete down. This was not like a tent.
No, it was a tension structure. So the how that works is it's not just fabric. It's a special. It was made by Dow Corning. Special. Maybe I was right the first time, but it's tight, and it has a steel cable around it on the outside called a catenary cable. And then what they do is they anchor the edges like a tent, but with concrete anchors drilled in. I think we had 190 concrete anchors drilled in, and then the fabric goes into the center around the poles, and it's jacked up. The whole lot is jacked up until it has a pressure of something like 7 tons pulling upwards, and the anchor's pulling downwards. And this fabric, which is very, very thin, is like this table. You can walk on it without it even denting. It's a tension structure. Wow. So it was a massive technical...
And it was in the Guinness Book of World Records.
It was, yes, as the largest mobile structure on Earth.
Although when you hear what it took to pitch it, it's hardly... mobile.
Well, it took us 6 months to put it up. Yeah,
that's like building a building.
It was like building a building. I mean, we had Atlas Copco drilling machine on tanks tracks. Massive equipment, and our guys, all of them, none of them were trained engineers. We trained them. I helped a lot of them. Others helped, and we had an engineering company overseeing it. But the responsibility fell actually on me, I guess. Wow. And we completed the tent. We built that tent.
How many years was that?
It took us, I think, 3 years. And the reason there was fundraising. Yeah. Raising money that slowed us down a lot. But the tent went up. We dedicated it in Soweto, and it was jam-packed full. Then it blew away in Cape Town in a freak storm. The fabric tore. And there was weeping and wailing, maybe gnashing of teeth too. And everybody said, "Oh, this is terrible." But and we had this crusade going to start. Now the tent's blown away. Well, the fabric, everything else was there. I mean, it was immovable, the structure. And but as Reinhard always used to say, the devil always shoots himself in his own foot, because now the tent blew away, and this fabric was ripped to bits and fluttered all over the high density township where we were going to hold the crusade. And the crusade hadn't started yet, but the advertising had gone out, and preliminary meetings had been going on for months. And what happened is people picked up the pieces of cloth of the tent, fabrics, not cloth, picked it up, laid it on sick people, and they were healed. And I said, how does that work? I mean, it happened so much. It got into the press. And of course, the advertising. Then the tent would have seated 34,000 people, but we went ahead without the tent, with just the masts and the benches that we had, and the PA system and the electricity, all open air. And for the first time in our lives, we had over 70,000 people pitch up for a meeting. Wow. Because the advertising, they'd all come to see what these people doing. Thousands of people saved. The area that we were in was a wicked, violent area. It was crime-free for the entire week. Thousands of people got saved. People got saved who were not even in the meeting, because we had powerful sound systems, and stories of people wanting to commit suicide and then coming out, giving their lives to Jesus Christ. So, yeah, that was the beginning.
So actually it looked like a disaster, but actually it was the barrier
exactly
being dropped. I remember Reinhard saying one pastor told him, criticizing, said that tent was the most expensive billboard in history.
That's right. Yeah, and you know what Reinhard said to him? He said to him, "No," he said, "you're wrong." He said, "This was not a billboard." He said, "This was a rocket ship. It launched us. Rocket booster has launched us, and the satellite is in orbit." Yeah. He said, and then he said to him, "Nobody complains when a huge booster goes up and then falls in the ocean and a small satellite goes on. They all say, it's wonderful. He said, we're in orbit in Jesus' name.
Yeah, and that mentality is what characterized CFAN.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
It was never about just building things for the sake of building them.
No.
It was always about one thing, and that's the harvest.
People getting saved. And, you know, we have these follow-up booklets, and people who know us know that everybody who makes a decision for Christ receives the follow-up booklet, and in the back is a decision card, self-inking, which we take out and hand to the churches, blah, blah, blah. It connects them to the churches. So, of course, when we started this process, we were printing the books, plenty of books. And at that time, they were costing us, I think, 25 cents each. So you say, oh, that's cheap. But we were ordering them by the million. I mean, 5-6 million at a time. I think to date, I stand to be corrected because I'm not that close to the stats. But I think right to date, we've printed something like 130 million of those in 66 languages. So we were printing the books and they were being dished out. And many people said, if you give out free books in an African crusade, it'll never work. The people will rush on the counselors and tear them out of their hands. And they said, and the next day, the books will be on sale in the marketplace for $1, you know. None of that happened. So the follow-up system was working, but I was looking at the stats again, and I saw we dished out, I can't remember exactly, let me just draw that, I saw we dished out 80,000 books, and we've got back 70,000 decisions. I said, 10,000 books. I said, it's the Christians. They're taking the books, although they're saying, if you're a Christian, don't take the book. It's for the unsaved people. And I was moaning and groaning about this to Reinhard. And I could see he was looking at me like, you know, what are you talking about? And then I stopped and looked at him. He said, Peter, it's like this. He said, it's organic waste. He said, take a maize plant, a corn plant. He said, a corn plant grows 7-8 feet high, big green leaves, and it's huge. And then it makes 5-6 cobs. He said, then we take the cobs off, and most of that we don't eat. We just eat the kernels on it. He said, nobody is complaining and saying, look at the waste, all that big plant and all the cobs and the leaves just to get a few kernels of corn. He said, organic waste. He said, it's in the natural world, it's quite okay. He said, and in the books, so there were 10,000 missing. May they be a blessing to the people who took them. He said, but 70,000 got saved. Yeah. And that's exactly it's an attitude, isn't it? Yeah. So we could have saved by cutting back on the books. But you know what it would have done? It would have been cutting back on the people ending up in the churches. Yeah. So, yeah, it's attitude. Yeah.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed the first part of this 2-part conversation that I'm having with Reverend Peter Vandenberg. So many amazing stories. We've talked about many of the things in his book and in Evangelist Reinhard Bonnke's book and many, many other stories. We're going to continue this again next week. So make sure that you click that subscribe link right there on the channel. Make sure that you don't miss a single upcoming episode here on the Daniel Kolenda Show.